Mhm.
Hi, so we're live now and I'm going to start the introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us today. It is our grand and final event for World Space Week 2021, the theme being Women in Space. Today, we're going to have an event called Blasting Off, as you can see up there, a panel discussion with women in space and tech. Our panelists are up on the screen. We've got Christine, Neve, and Emma. Before we dive into the panel discussion, just a couple of pointers. This session is live on YouTube right now, but you're not visible in it at all. It's just going to be me and what you see on the screen. I am going to hit record on the Zoom in a bit, so just you can be aware of if you're, you're not going to be visible in it either. Additionally, at the end of the event, in like 30 minutes after our panelists are done giving their talk, you're going to have a chance to ask them all of your questions. So do feel free to raise your hand, and like one of our AstroSoc committee members, so that's Oscar right there, me, and Simon right there at the back. We will probably see you, and your questions will be asked to our panelists. Again, you will not be visible in the questions, so no need to worry at all. And I will ask your questions to them directly. Final point, at 8, when we finish the Q&A session, or maybe like 8:10 or 8:15, might overshoot a little bit, we have coffee, tea, and biscuits waiting for you in the room right outside the lecture theater. And that will be a chance for all of you to socialize, make connections, and interact with each other, and just reflect on the event. If you have any questions for us committee members, or if you have any questions for our panelists, for instance, that could not get answered during the session because this is for a limited time, do feel free to pass them on to us, and we will do our best to get back to you within a reasonable time frame. With that being said, I am going to hit record now, and we will start off. It's being recorded. Hello again, Christine, Neve, and Emma. Thank you very much for joining us today and for taking the time to be with us and with all our audience members. With no further ado, we can move on to the introductions. Emma?
Thank you so much, Anwesha, for the introduction, and it's great to have the opportunity to speak to you all via Zoom, online, YouTube, and in the lecture theatre as well. So my name's Emma Taylor, and I'm one of your 3 panelists for today. And I'm really looking forward to talking about the perspective of blasting off into space and picking up the theme of World Space Week and women in space too. So a little bit of background on me. I currently work in the rail cybersecurity industry. I'm a safety engineer, and we're a VC-funded startup. I've actually been working for 30 years. And one of the things that's kind of key for me, although I've got lots of education in terms of the space and career paths and things like that, I've learned the most from experience. And I'm looking forward to sharing some of that experience and answering your questions in the discussion. Now, there are many things that sort of drive me that are interesting around this. One of the things I find the most fascinating about working with colleagues and communities is that what drives me is I really hate to see wasted talent. And that's one of the reasons for doing this panel here, is to allow people to ask questions about how they can develop their careers. But I'm not a mentor. And we'll cover that a bit more in the Q&A, because there's some great questions that have already come through from the audience. So I've been working for 30 years, but I'm actually, in terms of career stage, I'm early stage. I'm in about 12 months into my role at the cybersecurity, and I'm actually on my 4th sector. So I've worked in the space industry for 20 years, in energy for 7, in like the sort of rail and transport industry now 6 years and counting. I'm now on the 4th stage. So I'm a living example of lifelong learning. So I'm looking forward to bringing my expertise in, and that's me for an introduction.
So I think I'm next. I'm Neve. I've not been working for 50 years. I'm a 3rd year undergrad student at the University of Strathclyde. I've got a bit of a background in cybersecurity, which feels like a weird thing to say because I'm studying aeromechanical engineering. But when I was in high school, I was selected for a cybersecurity exchange program that was 3 weeks long that kind of pushed me into that world. And unfortunately, it came right as I had already applied for university, so I couldn't keep going with it. But I have a passion for space, and I have since I was like 5 years old. So I wasn't too gutted about that. I met Emma at the UK SEDS Student Space Conference, and we started talking about cybersecurity, which feels like an odd thing to do at a space conference, but it's given me a lot of opportunities in the space industry. So yeah, I have a lot of weird opportunities that have come up for me that have put me in weird situations, but all of them seem to circle back to space, which I'm very happy about. I'm not all about space though. As you can see on the slide, I love sports. I play for the Strathclyde football team. I also play a lot of video games. I bake with my flatmate, and I've recently got into crochet, which my gran taught me to do when I was younger. So yeah, I'll pass it over to Christine.
Hi, I'm Christine. So I currently work at NATS, which are, I think they're one of the biggest, if not the biggest, air navigation service provider in the UK. So they do the air traffic management in UK airspace and at airports and things like that. So I do regulatory compliance there, which basically means that my team and I work to ensure that the business is compliant with all the regulation and legislation that's relevant to the business. But we also do a little bit of like analysis to figure out what legislative changes, how they might impact like safety in the company. So there's kind of, that's where safety comes into it. And as you can see in that first point, my title is actually Risk and Safety Apprentice. So I'm working at NATS, but they're also funding me to get a master's degree in Risk and Safety Leadership, which I've just recently submitted my thesis for 2 weeks ago today. So finishing up with the master's degree part of it and continuing to work at NATS for the time being. And it's been a really good opportunity for me and a really good experience. I started working at NATS in 2019 after I finished my bachelor's degree, which was actually in human biology and kind of health psychology. So not really space related, not aviation related. Don't know how I ended up in aviation, but I love it. It's really interesting and it keeps me on my toes. And I've definitely become more interested in space in the last few years. So I've started to do some volunteer work that's related to space and that kind of thing. So yeah, so that's kind of what I do. From a work perspective. Outside of work, I like to go for hikes with my wife and our 15-year-old Jack Russell, who does still like hiking despite being 15 years old and having really, really short legs. I also really enjoy cooking, and I try to bake. I'm not very good at it. I think there's probably something to be said for like doing hobbies that you're not good at because you enjoy them rather than being good at them. So yeah, not the best at baking, but I do try. And also I really like learning new things. I love learning about people as well. So I really like reading memoirs and things from people who've done really extraordinary kind of things. So yeah, that's me.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for the introductions, and I'm absolutely excited for the next part where we're going to get more of your insights on what your career journeys have been like. We can move on to the next slide. Perfect. So the first question that we're going to, or the first topic that we're going to look at is, what are your connections to the space industry? We're going to go in the same order for all of our topics or questions. And the first one we have is from Emma.
Thank you so much. So it's a really important question here. What are my connections to the space industry? Because as you can hear, I work in a rail cybersecurity. So you might immediately think to yourself, well, you've got no connections. I mean, back when I sort of graduated, I had a sort of sponsorship arrangement with British Aerospace Space Systems, who are now called Airbus. And so I did a year before university, I was doing a physics degree. Afterwards, I did a master's in space science, a PhD. I did International Space University, European Space Agency, young graduate trainee, all the way through to 2008, which is when my sort of space career effectively stopped. And it was because I was a carer from 2000 to 2008. And towards the end, it wasn't possible to do the two things together. So I then went off and went back to do another master's, retrained. That's how I ended up working in energy. And that's how I ended up working in the rail sector. So I remember thinking to myself, you know, my second career in energy and safety, and now my rail career. And I thought, you know, this is great. Space belongs to the past. That was something I did. I enjoyed it. I've still got my PhD up on the wall. I've got bits of spacecraft with holes blown next to it, just there within reach. But it's past story. And then I got an email from UK SEDS 2018. It said, would you like to come to an alumni reunion? And it was the 30-year alumni reunion, which I can tell you, it makes you feel really old, really old. And I said, I'm going to go. And I contacted someone that I worked with back in 89. And I said, look, should we meet up? We've not met each other for 25 years. And my husband said, why are you going? Well, why not? You know, what's the worst thing that happens? I turn up and I don't enjoy it. I can always come home. You know, it's not that far away. And so I went, and I remember walking into that UK SEDS conference, and I was amazed. I mean, snow logistics nightmare, but there were 350 people registered. There was a trade exhibition that was better than the ones I'd go to for the day job. And I just thought, wow. And I thought, maybe it's not such a crazy idea to connect back with space. I ended up forming mentoring relationships. I ended up getting the UK SEDS trustees to mentor me, because I was the chair of a professional engineering institution at the time. And I was looking, it was like a mature organization. I was looking at this vibrant student space organization. I thought, these guys have got to mentor me. And so that was it. So, and I brought my safety knowledge in from other sectors into space. And that came about because I started organising cross-sector safety events through the Safety and Reliability Society. And I thought, okay, why not do one in space? I've been to UK SEDS, it's still 2018, why not? And I can still remember somebody from the UK Space Agency came up to me after I'd done this sort of Q&A and so on. He said, have you considered taking your skills back into the space sector? And I genuinely hadn't. No idea. Not even occurred to me. I mean, that was 2008 and we're 2018. And I suddenly realized there was a place for my skills to support the space sector. And there's a place for my connections and my mentoring to be able to support people who wanted to enter into the space sector or stay in the space sector or stay connected. And so that's really how the second phase of Space Connection started. That's how I met Neve, Christine, and Wesha. And that's how I can carry on supporting people. And so right now, the live connections with the space industry, specific on a technical basis, it's to do with cybersecurity and cross-sector learning. So that's my links with Neve. And also we're putting together a special issue on space debris through the Safety and Reliability Society, an academic journal. And Christine's my co-editor. So it's amazing the number of different ways you can maintain a connection to the space industry, even if your day-to-day salary, job, or study right now isn't to do with space. So that's me.
That is so cool to hear. I guess it would be cool to also know Neve's views on this.
Yeah, I remember when I first saw this question, my immediate knee-jerk reaction was like, oh, I'm just a student. Like, I've got no connections to the space industry. And then I sat and thought about it for a few days and I was like, it's not really true. So obviously I've got Emma and Christine now, I guess, that were on this panel chatting. But Emma, obviously we linked over cybersecurity, but it's been helping me a lot with a lot of space things. So one of my goals for this year is to get an internship in the space industry. And Emma's been helping me a lot with that. And also sometimes I forget that I'm the president of StrathSEDS, which is Strathclyde Space Society. I know some of the guys from SEDS are watching, so shout out to all of them. So we run a lot of workshops throughout the year. This week, Matthew, our treasurer, ran a 3D printing workshop that was about designing landing legs and how you can design things for 3D printing properly. And basically everything we do is space themed. We run 2 meetings every single week and we have a lot of fun with it. We also have a competition team. So this year we're entering Mach 22 with definitely a CANSAT and hopefully a rocket, which this group of StrathSEDS have never done before. So that would be really exciting. We went to Mach 21 last year and made a lot of space connections there because everyone who went, like you can imagine, you spend a whole year working on a project. You're going to be pretty passionate about it by the time you get it to launch. So I think there was 10 teams there. and just getting to chat with everyone over the weekend. You make a lot of connections there. Yeah, I think the main thing for me is just all of my connections to space have come about in ways that I wouldn't expect. So my connection with Strathsed was actually a friend of mine who's in an older year. She was the president when I joined university, and she told me to come along, and I was like, that sounds doesn't really sound up my street. And after 1 week, I was like, I love this. This is great. Because it was the first time I'd been around people who were just really passionate about space, and everyone's really excited about it. And that's probably why there's some of them here tonight. They're really interested in it. We have a great time. And then obviously, probably this time last year, I guess, maybe not quite that long ago, I met Emma at the UK SEDS space conference. And yeah, we're hoping that next year with Strathsed, we can start doing some outreach with local primary schools and try and give them some of the connections that we wish we could have had when we were a bit younger. But yeah, that's me.
That sounds amazing. And to be fair, to an extent, I could kind of relate to your about how you got involved with Strathseds, for instance, because as chair of AstroSoc, I mean, right now, I mean, although I'm like chair, for instance, but when I started, it was literally the exact same thing. Like I ran into a fourth year student who was like, "Ooh, we have an AstroSoc event today," and I was like a very lost first year at that point. Joined in, really enjoyed it, built some like not rockets like anything like space societies in general. We built rockets out of paper and launched them across a room, and I realized that this is something I really enjoy. So I attended a couple more events, and then just building on from that, that was really cool to see how it's kind of it all ties in together, doesn't it?
Yeah, it was the exact same thing for me. And I remember and I'd met some friends in like the first week, because when you're a first year and you just kind of latch on to people and you're like, you're my friends now. And I dragged them all along to SEDS, and I think they're a bit apprehensive that first meeting, but they're all on the committee now, so they clearly did something for them. But yeah.
Some of my closest friends are also on committee, so I can
Yeah.
completely understand that that's what we do.
Yeah.
Great. Christine, what would you like to say about this question?
So I kind of had the same reaction to Neve when I first read this question, because as you can see in the first point that I've put on there, I don't work in the space industry. I work in aviation. It's a closely related industry, but it is a different industry. And I had kind of my first real exposure to the space industry earlier this year at the National Student Space Conference that UK SEDS put on. That's where I met Emma, and I kind of made all of these really great connections with people, both like on LinkedIn and kind of like networking from that perspective as well, like meeting people and having these conversations around things that everyone was interested in. And it was the first time that I was in this environment where there were so many people who were interested in so many different aspects of space that I was just kind of mind blown and a little bit overwhelmed, to be honest, because I was like, there's so much here and there's so much to choose from, and I don't know what to do. So I went to a panel that was about space debris, and I found it so interesting. So I think that really like kind of sparked my interest for that, and it kind of led to me co-editing this journal that Emma was talking about earlier. But I also wanted to kind of try and draw a link between space debris, the space industry, and also my master's degree and my thesis for that, which was about organizational learning from failures. And I wanted to try and figure out how can I make this connection between, this safety organizational learning aspect that I studied and that I spent so much time on, and I don't just want to abandon it, but I also want to incorporate it into the space discussion and the space debris discussion as well. So I think that's kind of maybe a long-term goal for me, is to establish that connection and develop it a bit more. But I'm also really passionate about trying to get people to realize that you don't have to have a particular background to get into any kind of industry, but especially the space industry. You don't have to study engineering or astrophysics or whatever. Like, you can do that, but you don't have to. And I think that's something that I really want a lot of people to realize is, just look at me, for example. I studied biology and psychology. I wouldn't naturally draw that connection between biology, psychology, and space. But there are ways to get into the industry if you really want to do it.
That is wonderful to know. I mean, it's going to sound very cringy, but at the end of the day, determination does make it through.
Yeah, absolutely. It really does. And I think you have to like put yourself, you have to do a little bit of planning, obviously, and try and figure out what is a good opportunity and what's an opportunity that's going to benefit you. But putting yourself out there like really makes a difference.
I think that ties in very nicely to our next couple of questions if we want to move on to the next slide. So this question is, what is the greatest roadblock for equality, diversity, and inclusion, or EDI, in STEM? And how could this be ameliorated, or how could this be fixed? I like fancy words, so I went with ameliorated. Emma, would you like to begin?
Absolutely. I think that EDI, or back when it first appeared on my radar when I was a sort of a early career sort of female engineer, it was something that was nothing really to do with me. I was doing engineering because I enjoyed it, and that was it. And like there was a separate sort of equality, diversity, inclusion. It was women in engineering at that point. Things have really broadened and changed. And as my career's developed, I've become more aware and more active and engaged with it because I realized the power of a role model in helping counter people's perceptions. In our last round of discussion, previous question, people were saying, I didn't think I could be in the space industry, or I didn't feel I could belong as a basis of technical skills or career background and so on. And I think sometimes one of the biggest roadblocks that people don't talk about is the sense of self-identity. I don't think I've got the same background. I don't look the same. I don't speak the same. I'm not working the same role. So I can't actually be part of this space community or the STEM community. It's the believing the possible. And I think that one of the biggest roadblocks also is like narrow-minded, that you can only get help from a certain category of the community. If you're a woman engineer, you can only get help from women engineers. It's a very valuable community to tap into because they may have shared similar paths. But just because you're a woman engineer or a woman in space doesn't mean you've got common knowledge that's applicable to all. And one of the shout outs I'd like to do is for the very powerful and supportive role that senior men have played, both for my career and for other careers. And you perhaps don't think about it being as like a great way to ameliorate the roadblocks, but they have got a lot of skills and background. So I think the other thing is that people think of mentors with a capital M. If you remember, I'd introduced myself and said, I'm not a mentor, because people then come to a mentoring relationship thinking, well, you are my mentor, you will steer and advise me, you will open doors. And it's kind of sort of like a relationship high to low. And if you want to sort of find the best number of paths for your way through for your career, don't think of it as mentor and mentee. Think of it as peer-to-peer. You've already heard in the discussions just how Christine and Neve and I became connected, and Anwesha, we connected through LinkedIn. And it's very much peer-to-peer mentoring. I learn as much from the discussions that I have with people as I pass on advice. And group mentoring is so much more effective. You might be sitting there thinking, well, you know, I'm the only sort of female engineer that's interested in electronics and space. You know, I feel like an isolated minority. You've got the self-belief. And the help that you've got is from your friends and your colleagues and your students. It doesn't matter who they are and what background. You could ask them, I think I'd like to do this, but I don't think it will work. And then get them to listen to you and then ask some open questions back. Honestly, the amount of sort of benefits you can have from just a 15-minute chat that doesn't have a mentoring label is amazing. Lots of little conversations here and there. Now, one of the other roadblocks, and this wasn't a problem 30 years ago because nobody really talked about equality, diversity, and inclusion, but it is more of an issue now, is what the people I work with in communications call virtue signaling. And that's a lot of sort of positive story, like, you know, we believe in X, Y, Z, you know, like here's some pictures with like a diverse range of faces. And it's a lot easier now to communicate that message about we believe in EDI, but actually then not to implement it. And this is one of the sort of challenges that people find when they're trying to find a workplace or a student society or a university. How do you actually select the environment which is truly welcoming, where people are actually walking the walk? And I think the only way really to do that is to go and spend time with people. You can tell people's authenticities, you can tell people's practical application, and you can tell by conversations whether people are really open or not. So that's a roadblock, because now we have a little sort of perception and then reality. But actually, this negative perspective can actually lead to positive progress because it gets you to challenge your assumptions. And I think the real takeaway is don't judge by the outside, both yourself and others, because help and support can come from the strangest of places and the most unusual connections. And that's me. Over to Neve.
Yeah, so the first thing I thought of when I saw this was how the roadblocks I had with cybersecurity. And that when I was younger, like obviously I knew cybersecurity existed, but it was this big kind of world that I never saw myself in. I never thought I would belong in it. And that only really changed when I think I was either 16 or 17, and I got a UCAS email that was about some high school cybersecurity program. And I was in a free period at school and I was very bored. And I was like, I'll do a few challenges. And 3 months later, they were like, we've selected you to go on this exchange program. And I was like, you've selected me for what? I remember I phoned my mum. So I was like, Mom, I've been selected for this thing. And she was like, it's a scam, delete the email. And I was like, great. But luckily I did apply for it. I ended up going on exchange, had the best time. But it was a 3-week exchange. I remember the whole time just thinking like all of these, because there was 20 of us there. And I remember thinking the whole time, like the other 19 kids, like they're way smarter than me. They know so much more about cybersecurity, like they're way better than me. And it was only like the third last day, they took us to Disneyland. Don't know how that relates to cybersecurity at all. But we were waiting in line for the Star Wars ride. And I started talking to one of my friends and we were just chatting about it. And I like mentioned like, oh, like everyone who's so much smarter than me. She was like, I'm so glad you said that because I thought that too. And we started talking about it and we realized that ever since we were kids, whenever we thought about cybersecurity, it was like men in suits working for GCHQ. And it was never people who looked like us. And we also realized that all of the places we visited over the past 3 weeks, because we had actually visited GCHQ and we visited like BT, I think, and like every single place we went, it was all guys wearing blue jeans with a belt and a check shirt. Every single person we met, that's what they looked like. And we just realized that was something that, like, if we hadn't seen that when we were younger, it might have been easier to break into that. And I think it happens when you're a kid. Like, that's when you start forming these ideas about who gets to work where and who gets to do what. Like, luckily for me, I'm from Edinburgh, and we have this thing called the Edinburgh Science Festival every year, or as my parents call it, free childcare for 2 weeks in February. And I went every year from the age of like probably 5, and I would do something there. I'd always do activities. So I always felt like I belonged in that community. And my favorite activities were always anything to do with space. So I've always kind of felt like I belonged in the space industry, but that's only because I was shown that from the age of like 5 to now. But I feel like if I'd had that with something else like cybersecurity, like I maybe have gone a different way. I'm glad I've ended up in the space industry, but I think when you're younger, you form a lot of ideas about who belongs in what industries. And if you want to change like people's attitudes about it and how people feel they can fit into places, it doesn't happen when they've sat all of their exams and they're 17 and you turn around to them and you're like, by the way, you could be a part of this industry. It happens when you're like 5 or 6 and you can actually see yourself in the future working in a job like that. Yeah, that's how I saw it.
Excellent. And to be fair, just to throw it out there, the fact that you mentioned, I mean, for instance, that you had a passion for the space industry since you were 5, that is really cool to see as well. And at the same time, it's like, I mean, for instance, I have been interested in like astronomy or physics since I was 5 as well, which is kind of why I'm doing my BSc in physics and particle physics right now. But at the same time, I also completely see like Emma's point of view as well, like with how you can like build on your interests and like, explore new avenues in later career stages as well. And I guess at the end of the day, the conclusion, I mean, would be, for instance, that no matter what path you take, what I'm picking up is that it's your interest and your, the will to explore and to actually try something new that makes the difference.
Yeah, I think you'll find your way to where you're meant to be eventually. Mm-hmm. But I think some things can be the difference between you doing that like straight out of school or doing it 10 years down the line or 20 years down the line. Like, I don't think it's ever too late to decide that you belong somewhere, but Absolutely. It can definitely be made easier along the way.
Mm-hmm. Christine, would you?
I think just to build on what Neve was saying a little bit is we need representation both in the media and, beyond that, to be more inclusive of the types of people that are represented by even just the conversations that we have. So a good example of this is I was talking to one of my coworkers the other day, and he was talking about this like theoretical engineer. So not a person that actually exists, just, this someone who's an engineer. And he kept using male pronouns to describe the engineer. And he caught himself and he said, oh, I mean, or she or they. And I personally wouldn't have been offended if he kept using the male pronouns to describe this engineer, but it was the fact that he caught himself and he realized, oh, actually, I shouldn't just be saying he, I should be saying she, I should be saying they. It was a kind of a moment for me where I was like, oh, that was really nice, actually. I'm really glad that he said that. And it's even just little things like that, in the conversations that we have with people. So I think that's a key thing, representation, definitely, and being aware of the language that we're using. But also engagement. So I've written on the slide, engagement, education, and sharing lived experiences. And I think the sharing lived experiences thing is really key, because nobody has experienced exactly the same things that you've experienced, and nobody knows exactly how those experiences have shaped you unless you tell them. And I think that's the key thing. We have to be willing to be vulnerable and share our experiences with people. But on the flip side of that, we also have to be willing to be open-minded and not just hear what people have to say, but listen and allow the things that people are saying to change the way we think. And I think that's a really, really key thing. And I don't see it enough, especially on like social media. You see, people having arguments because they stand on two different sides of a disagreement, and no one's willing to learn from each other. They just want to make their point. And that really frustrates me, because I just think we need to listen to people more. And also the last thing that I wanted to just touch on is that we need more people studying STEM from a young age, but specifically young girls. I know that, like, for me, I ended up in a STEM degree at university, but that was just by chance, I think. I probably would have gone down an arts path if I hadn't had the time away. So after I graduated high school, I took 2 years of just working full time, and then I went to university after that. And if I hadn't taken those 2 years away from studying, I would have definitely gone into an arts degree. So even that is just an interesting thing for me. Like, I wasn't super interested in STEM in school. I did I studied biology and I did physics and all of that, but I didn't think that I would end up in a career in it, and I have. So I think that's something that we need to increase as well.
I did a little clap there because that is so cool, and we're so glad you're in the STEM industry.
Oh, thanks.
Well, if we move on to the next slide, Christine, would you like to start off with your views on the next slide question?
Yeah, sure. So for me, this one, obviously I'm relating it more to working in aviation, but I think they're kind of similar in many ways. Both aviation and the space industry are kind of dominated by a certain demographic. And I personally felt that when I started, I was saying to Neve and Emma earlier, that when I started my job at NATS, I was on a team of 5 people, and I was the only woman on the team. And the men every day would come in and they would be wearing a suit and a tie. And there was a reason for that. It was because we might have an impromptu meeting with the regulator. So they always needed to look really professional. So I felt that in order to look professional, I needed to wear suits every day so that I was like on the same level as the men. Whereas I've kind of realized now that I can still look professional and powerful and effective if I wear a dress. Like, femininity and professionalism are not dichotomous. And I think that's something that it took me a long time. I mean, it's taken me the last 2 years of working in the industry to realize that. I've only recently started to dress a bit more feminine at work. And that's not to say that you have to dress feminine if you're a woman. That's just how I feel comfortable expressing myself. I think self-expression is key, and feeling like I can both be professional and express myself at the same time is something that was really a challenge for me being a woman in the industry at the beginning. The second thing is imposter syndrome. So that was extremely difficult for me. I know Neve kind of touched on it a little bit before, but when I first started working at NATS, I was like, I know nothing about aviation. I know nothing about air traffic management. How did I get this job? Why am I here? Everyone's going to see that I'm a fraud, basically. I was really worried about that. But I think one of the key things for me was realizing, one, that I knew more than I thought I knew, but also that everybody else in the room probably knew less than I thought they did. So actually, the difference between my knowledge and their knowledge wasn't as great as I thought it was. So I decided that I was just going to start being brave, speaking up, asking lots of questions. I think that's a key thing as well, not being afraid to ask questions and not being afraid to look dumb. I think that was something that I was always worried about was, oh, if I ask this question, they're going to think I'm dumb. But most people don't. That's just not how people often think. And in addition to that, not being afraid to be wrong. Those were kind of the key things that I realized helped me kind of not get over imposter syndrome, because I don't know if it ever goes away. I hope it does, but I think it helps you combat it a little bit more, and you can kind of carry it with some weight then. So then the last 2 points are kind of 1 point for me. So there's always a way to achieve your goals and always go for the job. I think something that I'm learning as I've been volunteering in space related things, and I've been, doing the journal with Emma, co-editing that journal, is when I went to the NSSC earlier this year, I didn't think, oh, I'll be working in space within the year, but I kind of am like, okay, I'm not getting paid for it, but I am doing that. And if I think, like, for people who are in a similar position to me, if you are looking to get into an industry and you actually want to get paid for it, like, okay, I'm not at that position now, but if someone was in that position and they felt, oh, I don't have the experience to go for this job listing that I've seen online, like, just go for it. Because what's the worst that's going to happen is you're not going to get the job, and then you can ask for feedback as to why you didn't get it, and then you can improve for future applications. So there's literally no downside to applying for a job that you might think that you're not quite qualified for. And just to bring that, sorry, I know I'm talking a lot, but just to bring that back to the women in space thing, I heard someone say recently that when there's a job listing, men will often apply for it if they feel that they meet, I think it was 70% of the qualifications or the essential requirements. Women will often go for it only if they meet over 100%. So I personally relate to that. Like, I've recently, not that I'm looking for jobs actively, but I've recently noticed, like, in myself that when I look at job listings, I'm now like, oh, okay, even if I didn't meet all of those, if I wanted that job, I would still apply for it. But in the past, I wouldn't have done that unless I had met over 100% of the essential skills. So I think that's a really key point as well. I'll stop talking now.
That was excellent, to be fair, every single point you shared. Just for the sake of time, if we can move on to Emma.
Well, I think that Christine covered so many sort of valuable points here about, like, challenges and, like, what goes on inside your head in terms of advice. So I'm going to be quite compact with my advice here. One, challenges are partly inside and partly outside. And this is where having a group of people that you can ask for advice helps calibrate it. You think, did I really sort of, like, was I being too touchy when someone interrupted me, or were they really actually sort of being not very nice and cutting across me? I think that one of the number one bits of advice here really is, like, the point I made at the bottom: learn from other people's challenges, have that group discussion, learn from other people's career paths, and it's all there on LinkedIn. You can have a look at my career path, you can have a look at other people's, and you can mix and batch the things that you might think, the ways that you can get around challenges, learn from other people's stories. Christine talked about reading biographies of people who've done challenging things. Absolutely brilliant. There's one key thing here about network, something called weak ties. You can have a Google about it. But the headline is, you won't get your job from your direct network. You'll get the job or contacts or suggestions or ideas or projects via the person who knows somebody. It's called weak ties, second degree connections. So consider yourself, when you're building that network of consultation, of people to ask advice for, don't rule out people who aren't directly connected to you, and don't rule out people who are indirectly in the wrong sector. People will always give you 15 minutes of their time if you show that you'll take on board advice. So I think really you can restart, you can develop, you can look at parallel lines. Very few people start at an industry and then work their way up, all the way up. I saw one person do it in the chemical industry. I swear, honestly, divergence and roots in, sideways, all three of us got unusual paths into our space careers. And that doesn't make us worse. It actually makes us better and stronger. Biggest mistakes. Not writing a plan till the age of 45. Just take a one-page paper, start now. It's your plan. You can put whatever you want on it. You can draw unicorns, you can scribble. You don't need to show anybody. Just put down some things that you'd like to do. And then have little informal discussions with people. The biggest mistakes I've made is when I didn't ask for advice. So Anwesha, I'll go quiet and pass it over to Neve. Hopefully I've a good feeder in. But yeah,
can I just
ask
say
questions.
Unicorn? Can I just say the unicorn split was very tempting? I might just do that.
Draw a unicorn, your piece of paper.
Neve, over to you.
Yeah, sorry. I feel like everyone's touched on like all the great points for what's happened. I feel like the big thing for me has always been imposter syndrome. Every time I've been about to apply for something, like I haven't even looked into who else has applied, who else has got whatever the thing is I'm applying for. I'm already like, I won't get that. Like everyone else who's applying must be better than me, must know more than me, must have more connections than me. The list goes on. And then I apply for it. And sometimes I get it and sometimes I don't. But I feel like I've learned more from not getting them, because like I'll get rejected and I'm like, that wasn't so bad. Like it's not that scary once you've done it. It's taking the first step into it. Like I remember the very first big thing I ever applied for was when I was 15. One of my teachers came to me and was like, Nave, I found this scholarship that's perfect for you. I remember just sitting there being like, Miss, there's no ways that there is a scholarship on this planet that is perfect for me. I'm not the smartest kid in the class. I'm not the hardest working kid in the class. Like, why do you think this fits me? And she was like, just apply for it, see what happens. And I applied for it. I got an interview. It went really well. And I ended up getting funding to do a lot of projects that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And I wasn't even going to apply at one point because I was too scared that I was going to get rejected for it. And I think I learned so much from that, because I was so close to just not even sending in my application. I'd worked on it for 3 hours and I was so close to just not even submitting it because I was scared of getting told no. But I got told yes, and now I just keep applying for things and finding myself in really cool situations, like on this panel, just by saying yes to things. I mean, obviously, sometimes you don't have the time and there's a million things going on in your life. But I think if an opportunity comes up and you know that you can do it, like just in terms of time and effort, like just go for it, because you don't know what the worst that will happen probably isn't as bad as you think, and it will probably go really well. So yeah, that would be my advice to anyone.
I guess in a nutshell, that would mean that breaking the ice in terms of your career journey is like 90% of the like challenge in a way.
Yeah, definitely. It's just taking that first step. It's the hardest and scariest part. But once you've done it once, and even once you've failed once, I think you kind of get a bit of confidence out of that, because you realize that it wasn't as terrifying getting told no as you thought it would be.
We can move on to the next slide.
Keep forgetting to do slides.
Perfect. Just for the sake of time, if it's all right, if we can wrap up the slides within like 3 to 4 minutes, and then we can move on to the Q&A, as we have overshot a little bit.
That's good.
Emma, would you like to begin with sharing what inspires you? What's your driving force?
I think the fact that like there isn't a start, a middle, and an end when it comes to your professional life. You can refresh, you can have like options in parallel. Christine's doing aviation and space, Neve's doing space and cybersecurity. I've done like space, rail, energy, cybersecurity. And other people's professional paths always inspire me. Looking at other people's adventures. LinkedIn is great. You can learn what other people have done. And I encourage people to take out that pen and draw that unicorn and think, what do I want to be doing in 10, 20, or 30 years? And don't just think about the next step. Think about 4, 5, 6, or 7. And it's your piece of paper, your plan. If you want to write a crazy goal down there, no one's going to stop you. And the act of writing down that goal, even if it's really crazy, inspires you and gets your little brain thinking in the background, thinking, what would the next step be? So you'd be surprised what it can pull off. So yeah, that's the inspiration.
Neve, over to you.
Yeah, I was quite taken aback by this question. And I feel like just everything inspires me. I think when you're a uni student, sometimes your course gets quite hard and you have to find things that inspire you to keep going through the classes that you don't like very much. I think mostly my friends inspire me a lot. So I know a couple of them are here from SEDS, and like just the amount of work they put into everything just amazes me. And like you see your friends working hard, you want to work hard too. Also, my friends that have graduated and are off doing amazing, really cool things that I would love to do when I graduate. That inspires me too, because I know how hard that they worked when they were at my stage. And even like my younger friends inspire me too. So I used to be a football coach, and I'm still in touch with some of the kids that I used to coach, and they're like applying for university and doing all that stuff that you do when you're 16. Like they just inspire me, because I remember when I was 16 and I was terrified to go to university and I didn't think I'd be very good at it. And like, I think I'm doing pretty all right for myself. So it inspires me to see how far I've come. Also, the one I put on the bottom, old space missions that I like to talk about with my friends a lot. Just like we went to the moon with less RAM than I have on my PS2 that's sitting in the corner of the room. I think that's really inspiring. So yeah.
That is so cool. And finally, Christine.
Yeah, so again, like Neve said, lots of things inspire me, especially as both Neve and Emma have touched on other people. You know, I mentioned that I like to read biographies from people who've done kind of extraordinary things. One that I've read recently was Scott Kelly's Endurance, which was just an amazing book. And it's things like that that make me think there really is no limit to what I can achieve. If I want to do something, I can figure out a way to do it. And it might not be a linear path, and it might take me a really long time, but I can do it if I really want to. And it's what you said earlier, Anwasha, it's determination. A lot of achieving goals is determination. So yeah, I think that's what inspires me.
Amazing. I think the next slide is for Q&A time. Perfect. So that discussion was amazing. And I know for a fact that I learned a lot of new things today, especially about, you know, like charting career paths and just being brave about what you want to do and figuring out what it is that you enjoy the most. And with that being said, I will now open the floor to any questions that we have from the audience. Just feel free to raise your hand and shout out your question. If I don't see you, or if any of the committee members don't see you, no worries. And yeah, I will start off with one of the questions we have from our online audience. So we had a Google form going out, and we have had a couple of submissions from that. The first question we have is, if you could see yourself from 5 to 10 years ago, what piece of advice would you give?
I'll take this one first. When you prepped this question with me, I thought to myself 5 years ago and 10 years ago, I think the one piece of advice I'd give at 5 years, because I'd just come into my third career and I really wasn't very good at my job. In fact, I was pretty crap. And I think the piece of advice can be, if you set out your plan and put the bold goals on, but also focus on taking tangible steps. Right, okay, I'm not very good at this. I'm going to learn how to do better. I don't understand this. I'm going to research a bit more. You can actually get from A to B, even if B seems a long way away. It really is recognize where you are, make a plan, and then do something for the next day, even if it's a small step.
I think for me, for this question, the first thing I thought when I saw it was that I was 10 years old 10 years ago, which is a weird thought. So if I was giving advice to myself 10 years ago, it'd probably be just enjoy being a kid. Paying rent isn't fun, but you don't have to do it when you're 10. Just keep playing football, keep doing everything you're doing, because I had a great life when I was 10. Going 5 years later to 15 is probably a bit more relevant. probably be to just keep taking opportunities and don't be scared to just jump headfirst into things. Yeah, I feel like all of my opportunities, that, like the big ones that I can think of in my life, came from when I was 15 to like 17, in that bracket. And there were so many things that, like I've touched on, I was scared to do. And I'm so glad now that I did them. But yeah, I wish I could go back and tell myself to not be so frightened of just jumping into stuff.
Yeah, I think, sorry, Anusha.
No, I was just saying that is so cool.
I think for me, it's kind of what I touched on a little bit when I was talking about imposter syndrome earlier, is not being afraid to be wrong, to say the wrong thing, to ask the wrong question. And maybe as an extension of that, not being worried about how people perceive you so much. I think I'm very conscious of how I think people perceive me. It's probably not even accurate. So I think that's something that if 5 years ago I was just starting university, and I think that was something that I could have, if I could give myself advice, yeah, that's definitely what I would say now.
To be fair, like this question it's kind of made me go down memory lane as well, but I am not going to share more information because I know we're running short on time. The next question that we have is a rather technical question, but it is actually one of the questions that also really, really interests me. It's about space debris. So the question says, space debris is a major issue and seems to be one of the greatest current day challenges of space science. How do you think we can attain a balance between space science advancements while keeping space ethically and physically clean? The asker has made a shout out to CubeSats.
Can I take this one first? And then can I take us back to 1995, which is a long time ago, but that's when I started my PhD, and we were looking at the Hubble Space Telescope solar arrays, and like they were being rolled back down, brought back down to Earth, rolled back out again, and there were obviously lots of impacts on it from space debris and micrometeoroids, and an army of PhD students was designed to go and look at those holes, photograph them and analyze them, and that was the main part of my PhD. And so I was aware of like space debris making holes in things, and small things go fast, big kinetic energy, big hole. But the insight I had around space debris was I was working with, it was Matra Marconi at the time, and I went and walked around a clean room, and they were building a satellite, a really big satellite, and I remember looking at it and thinking to myself, I wonder what happens when space debris hits that, because that's big, it's going up there for a long time. I wonder. So I had a look at Google, and I looked around, and nobody seemed to be asking that question. Everyone was worried about sort of astronauts and space shuttle and things like that. And everyone says, well, like satellites haven't failed, and, like it's, space is big. And I remember I got hold of a piece of the spacecraft that was being manufactured, a small bit, and I took it back down to the test facility, and I actually blew a hole in it. And I've actually got a bit next to me, and like, I'll put myself on mute and get it out and put it on camera as we're doing this question. And no one had seen it before. So one of the biggest challenges around space debris, it's less so now because there's more awareness, is just getting across the sheer power, forgive me using the wrong physics term, of a kinetic energy, of an impact that like people don't believe they can understand that damage until they see it in practice. So the kind of balance between space advancements and the ethically question and like keeping space clean, to get that balance where we need it to be as a society and as a planet, I think we need to communicate what happens under the bonnet when you get this impact. So I'm going to put myself on mute and retrieve my bit of spacecraft whilst everyone answers, and then I'll put it up on screen.
I think for me, I'd probably argue that most of the things you could use to help with space debris could be considered an advancement in space science. Because at the moment, we don't really know, like we know that there's a problem and that there's a lot of dead satellites flying around, and there's a lot of little bits of things flying around that can take out pretty much anything. As Emma was saying, like a tiny little piece of space debris can do a lot of damage. And no one, as far as I know, there aren't many solutions to that going around at the moment, or many solutions being implemented. So really anything that people come up with could be considered an advancement in space science.
I think something that I think about when I'm trying to, we're obviously doing this journal, Emma and I, so I think about space debris a lot at the moment. But I think for me, it's kind of about incentivizing the companies that are building satellites and sending them up, and kind of it's the communication piece, as Emma said, but it's getting across to them how important it is and trying to create a business case for it, because they are businesses at the end of the day, and they're not going to want to kind of build like decommissioning into the like life cycle if there's not a business benefit to it. So we have to look at it from the business perspective as well as from the science perspective and from the ethical perspective. And there's so many different branches of it. It's quite a big question, actually. But I think, yeah, for me, one of the big pieces is incentivizing those companies to.
And educating, she says, interrupting. So there's a bit of spacecraft. That's not the first one I did. That's the whole in kinetic energy. It blew the back off.
Wow.
There we are. So in terms of striking the balance, actually showing people what high velocity impact looks like in a space debris environment packs a punch. So wrapping up now. So on that one, but I'm sure there's more questions, Anwesha.
That was so cool. I mean, that was a really pleasant surprise that you actually had that thing to show us. Lovely. Seeing as we have no live questions, we do have a couple of, like 3 more questions from the online Google form. One of the questions is, what are the greatest negatives or downsides to working in the space industry? As a woman, what challenges did you overcome and how so? Although we did partially cover this answer in the discussion, if you have any more points to share, especially with regards to what are the greatest negatives or downsides, because it would be nice to have a rather like fair view of it, because everything comes with you win some, you lose some.
I think you win some, you lose some is a great way to describe it, because there are negatives and downsides to working in any industry. I think for space, it could be perception, that because it's perceived to be a small community and you have to be in space to be part of space. I think that might be one of the negatives there. And so it's as much your own sort of self-image and identity and your own network and encouragement that's about of a barrier as much as like the real structural barriers. I'll do a shout out actually to the Space Skills Alliance and spacecareers.uk. Who are 2 organisations that look at the realities and practicalities of working in the space industry and suggest paths in. So spacecareers.uk and also the Space Skills Alliance. If you want to see what the reality is of the industry for like early career and mid-career, look at those resources. So yeah, that's my call on that one.
Christine and Neve, would you have anything to add to that? Emma, that was a wonderful answer.
I don't know if there's anything to add that we haven't, well, for me, if there's anything to add that we haven't already touched on. Like, again, I feel like for me, imposter syndrome is a big one. Just try to find a way to belong or feel like you belong. So I feel like sometimes that can be a bit of a perception thing on your own behalf, where you think you don't belong, but you really do. It's getting past your own mental block sometimes. That's probably the biggest negative for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say imposter syndrome again as well. I just think, like, obviously we've touched on that a lot in this discussion, but it's such a big thing for so many people, and women especially. So yeah, I think that's probably the big thing for me.
Excellent. Unfortunately, we do have to bring the session to a close now, because we're dot on time. So great. And honestly, this discussion was so insightful, and thank you so much for your time. Once again, it is a Monday evening and you took the time to share your experiences with us, and we really appreciate it. Before we hit stop on the recording and stop the live stream on YouTube, I would like to take this chance to let's just have a round of applause for our panelists. This was amazing. I'm not sure if you heard that. We had a wonderful round of applause here.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone in the audience, and thank you to you as well for sharing. So
no worries.
Thank you.
Additionally, actually, in fact, I would also like to make a shout out to WISE, PPS, and SatNav. So WISE is our university's Women in Science and Engineering Society. PPS is the Pointing Physical Society, and SatNav is our university's biannual student-led science magazine. So that's Science and Technology News and Views. If you've seen our social media posts on Instagram, Facebook, or any other platform, those were designed by WISE. So thank you, WISE, for helping out with the promotions. I can see the chair in the audience. PPS has helped us out with the tech setup for the event and just helping us figure out how this lecture theater works in terms of projectors and audios. We all know how university lecture theaters can get confusing. Thank you, PPS. SatNav, we have SatNav's chair and vice chair sitting in the audience. Feel free to wave if I've mentioned your name. And they have helped with covering the event, and any follow-up posts that you see, for instance, like articles, chances are that you will see them from SatNav. And last but not the least, to AstroSoc and our committee members, shout out to Simon and Oscar right there, and of course to audience members as well, because without you, this would have been impossible. And thank you for bearing with all my super long emails that I send out to all AstroSoc members at like the weirdest times of the day. And thank you for making it to the event this evening. We really, really appreciate it, and we hope to see you in future events as well. With that being said, I'm going to stop the recording now before moving on to the next segment. Da-da-da. Yes, I do. So we have stopped recording now. I will also stop the live stream on YouTube in just a second.
wave goodbye to YouTube. Keep him waving.